Perspective. In the graphic arts, it is an approximate representation on a flat surface, such as paper, of an image, as it is seen by the eye. The two most characteristic features of perspective are that objects are smaller as their distance from the observer increases, and they are foreshortened, meaning that an object's dimensions along the line of sight are shorter than its dimensions across the line of sight. Perspective allows an artist to control the illusion of depth in an image with space ranging from few inches to many miles. Linear and atmospheric perspective must be used together to make the illusion effectively. You will study each in turn, then construct a photo montage that exhibits your understanding of both. Both systems of perspective describe how objects appear in relation to their distance from the observer. This is not so much science as a means of describing and by interpretation of illustrating objects in space. Linear perspective. It seems obvious that apparent size of an object decreases the farther you get away from it. It is a surprise that this has not always been understood to be so. There is some indication from looking at mosaics that the ancient Greeks knew how to use perspective, but no documents from that time have survived. The first written information about linear perspective appeared about 400 years ago. It was in Europe during the Renaissance that the concept of linear perspective was finally formalized. Linear perspective is a system for drawing objects that use lines and vanishing points to determine how much an object's apparent size changes with space. Basic concepts. The horizon line is a theoretical line that represents the eye level of the observer. The horizon line is same as the horizon, the edge of the land against the sky, only on large flat plane like the ocean. Most of the time, geographic features, hills and other objects, trees and buildings make the horizon above the horizon line. Horizon line. Indoors, the horizon is often not visible, but there is still a theoretical horizon line representing the point of view of the observer. Look at the three sketches given here. The same telephone pole is in the same position in all the formats. The horizon is different. Can you tell where you are in relationship to the poles? The first pole is seen from the above, the second from the normal eye level, and the third appears to be floating over your head. An object's relationship with the horizon line shows whether you are looking up, down, or straight at the object. Vanishing point. Vanishing points are points on the horizon line where receding lines, that is planes, converge. The vanishing point is on the horizon line when objects has horizontal planes that are parallel to the ground. When the object's planes are inclined, the vanishing points can be above or below the horizon line. Objects that are placed parallel to one another use the same vanishing points. Objects set at different angles each have their own vanishing points. Basic systems of linear perspective. There are two basic systems of linear perspective. 1 point and 2 point named after the number of vanishing points used in each. All parallel lines follow the same rules. If one goes to a vanishing point, then all like lines to go the same vanishing point. In most systems, vertical lines are drawn vertical, not in 3-point perspective. Station point and ground line. The station point represents the eye of the observer. It is the camera in a photograph. The picture plane is the window that is represented by the picture. The ground line is a line that is parallel to the picture plane at the base of the object being depicted. Types of perspective. Of the many types of perspective drawings, the most common categorizations of artificial perspective are 1 point, 2 point, 3 point, 4 point, and 0 point. 1 point perspective. A drawing has 1 point perspective when it contains only one vanishing point on the horizon line. This type of perspective is typically used for images of roads, railway tracks, hallways, or buildings viewed, so that the front is directly facing the viewer. Any objects that are made up of lines either directly parallel with the viewer's line of sight or directly perpendicular, the railroad slats, can be represented with one-point perspective. These parallel lines converge at the vanishing point. Two-point perspective. A drawing has two-point perspective when it contains two vanishing points on the horizon line. In an illustration, these vanishing points can be placed arbitrarily along the horizon. Two-point perspective can be used to draw the same objects as one-point perspective, rotated. Looking at the corner of a house or looking at two forked roads shrink into the distance. One point represents one set of parallel lines. The other point represents the other. Looking at a house from the corner, one wall would recede towards one vanishing point, the other wall would recede towards the opposite vanishing point. Three-point perspective. Three-point perspective is usually used for buildings seen from above or below. In addition to the two vanishing points from before, one for each wall, there is now one for how those walls recede into the ground. This third vanishing point will be below the ground. Looking up at a tall building is another common example of the third vanishing point. This time the third vanishing point is high in space. Four-point perspective. Four-point perspective, also called infinite point perspective, in the curvilinear variant of two-point perspective. A four-point perspective image can represent a 360-degree panorama or even beyond 360 degrees to depict impossible scenes. This perspective can be used with either a horizontal or a vertical horizon line. In the latter configuration, it can depict both a worm's eye and bird's eye view of a scene at the same time. Zero-point perspective. Because vanishing points exist only when parallel lines are present in the scene, a perspective with no vanishing points, zero-point perspective, occurs if the viewer is observing a non-linear scene. The most common example of a non-linear scene is a natural scene. Example, a mountain range, which frequently does not contain any parallel lines. A perspective without vanishing points can still create a sense of depth. A zero-point perspective view is equivalent to an elevation. Using linear perspective. The use of linear perspective to draw architectural subjects is obvious. All subjects, though, still obey the same rules as geometric shapes. A thorough knowledge of perspective is required to successfully position objects in space. Atmospheric perspective. Atmospheric perspective deals with how the appearance of an object is affected by looking at it through a layer of air, moisture, dust, and pollutants in the atmosphere act to filter the visual information. This is most apparent on a foggy day when it may be difficult to see across the street. Even in the clear, dry air of a desert, the atmosphere changes the appearance of the distant objects. Atmospheric perspective. General rules. Contrast, colors, focus and details. Contrast. Contrast is greatest for close objects. Distant objects have less contrast in them and less to their surroundings. Each row of hills receding into the distance has less contrast with the next. Remember that value contrast is the strongest contrast when creating spatial illusions. Colors. Colors also change with depth. All of the colors are clear on near objects. Bright colors are only seen on close objects. Warm colors also show up more on near objects. As objects get farther away, the colors dull and eventually turn blue-gray. Partially because of this, warm colors appear to closer than cool colors. Choose colors in an image accordingly. Focus. Focus in an image also gives depth clues. Close objects are generally more sharply focused than distant objects. It is possible to alter this with a camera, but the mind sees softly focused edges as being farther away than sharp edges. There may be compositional reasons to soften the focus of close objects in an image to call attention on something farther back in space. Details. Details are much more apparent on near objects because of all the above. Linear perspective makes more distant details too small to see, but it is low contrast that tends to flatten distant objects. Pay attention to how these concepts play out when you are looking at landscape. The same tree looks not only smaller in the distance, linear perspective, but also less leafy, contrast, detail and focus, not as bright a green color. As the trees get farther away, they blend into the landscape and eventually all you see are rows of hills, flat as cutouts, receding to the horizon. This is especially true on a hazy day or when you are looking into the sun. Deep space photo montage. Make a photo montage that uses overlap, linear perspective and atmospheric perspective to give a convincing illusion of deep space, from several feet to several miles. At least 3 different photo references must be used, one for the foreground, one for the middle ground and one for the background. Procedure. The foreground and background are the most critical parts. For the foreground, look for a large, sharply focused picture of an object with bright, warm colors. For the background, look for a large photograph that shows deep space and has cool colors in the distance. Warm colored sunsets are hard to make look like deep space. The middle ground must fit somewhere in between the foreground and background in space. There is a lot of flexibility with the middle ground. One strategy is to use the interior of a room for the middle ground with the background seen through a window or door. This allows you to use a smaller photograph for the background. Linear perspective considerations. Size. Choose the pictures to use for each of the 3 depths with size in mind. Remember that objects appear to get smaller the farther away they are. Try to judge the depth of the image from size of the objects in it and choose accordingly. The foreground object will need to be large. The background should include distant mountains, small now in size. A cloudy sky may not be used as a background because the depth is hard to verify. The middle ground should fit in the middle. Horizon line. Every photograph has a horizon line that represents the level of the camera that took the picture. The horizon lines for all of the picture parts in your photo montage must be on the same line. Look carefully at each image and try to find where the horizon line is. The only surefire way to tell is if the ocean is in the background. Then the horizon and the horizon line are the same. Ask yourself if you are looking up, down or straight at the scene or object. This can be difficult with natural objects, but lines of perspective will help if there is any architecture in the photo. Your point of view represents the horizon line. Atmospheric perspective considerations. Contrast. Use a highly contrasting image for the foreground. It should have high contrast within it and contrast with its surroundings in your image. As the scene goes farther back, use less and less contrast. Be aware of a highly contrasting background with a softer middle ground. Color. Keep the foreground bright and warm in color. The background should be the dullest and coolest in color. Be careful of warm colors in the background since they will want to come forward. Focus. Make the foreground the sharpest in the image, the middle ground the next sharpest and the background the dullest if possible. Details. Use an object for the foreground that has a lot of details. The background should be chosen because it has little in the way of details. The middle ground, as usual, is in the middle. Cut out the 3 layers carefully. You may use more layers and stack them to see if they give a convincing illusion. You may have to move the parts around some to get the horizon line to seem right. The finished product should look like a single photograph that shows a scene that starts close to the observer and goes for miles into the distance. Gesture drawing. For starters, we need definition for gesture drawing. Though there isn't a specific entry in most dictionaries, here is the heart and soul of it. A gesture drawing is usually a quick, often simple drawing that captures the essential feeling, energy, movement, action, or pose of the subject. It contains a minimum amount of information, line, tone, markings to achieve the maximum results of the essence of the subject. It can be realistic, but is not always. It does not try to capture anything photorealistically, but instead alters reality down to its purest form to tell the story of the scene being drawn. Doing a gesture drawing. When you sit down to do a gesture drawing, several things are important to keep in mind. You are not studying anatomy. That is for another drawing session. The gesture drawing doesn't allow for that type of study because you may have only 30 to 60 seconds, sometimes less, to get the marks down on paper. It is important not to lose your initial impression that popped into your mind in the split second you saw the image you are going to draw. As artists, we can quickly become absorbed in details, especially delightful folds in clothing and wrinkles along bending torsos. Unless the detail add to the story of what you are drawing, it is not essential for your gesture drawing. Action drawing. A comic effect can be done by not using anticipation after a series of gags that used anticipation. Almost all real action has major or minor anticipation, such as pitcher's wind-up or a golfer's backswing. Feature animation is often less broad compared than short animation unless a scene requires it to develop a character personality. Line of action. The line of action is an imaginary line that traces the movement of your character's body in a simplified and generally intense way. Planning your drawings based on this line is an excellent technique to achieve the desired goal. That way you can enhance the dramatic effect. Keep this in mind the next time you draw your characters in action. The line of action should be fluid and streamlined so that we can clearly see the real intentions behind each of the characters' action. Notice how it looks odd when your design is based on complex lines of action. We see a perfect example of simplicity and rhythm in cartooning. The line of action provides to the artist a chance to broaden the impact of his scenes. Use this method even before defining the proportion of your characters. Dynamic poses. From a bouncing ball to the body weight of a person walking, this is the most important element you will be required to master. It will be used often. This movement prepares the audience. It is for a major action the character is about to perform, such as starting to run, jump, or change expression. A dancer does not just leap off the floor. A backwards motion occurs before the forward action is executed. The backward motion is the anticipation. 2D design. 2D design is the creation of flat or two-dimensional images for applications such as electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, architecture, and video games. Blueprints are typically two-dimensional designs that give indications of height and length of construction purposes. Designing. Designing is the art of planning. Design can also be described as the organization of visual information. Design. We are all designers. To design means to plan. Almost everything we come in contact with has been designed by someone. This is most obvious in manufactured items, although good design is rare. Most of the living things we see have also been designed. Sheepdogs and American Beauty roses are not the product of natural selection. They were designed. The people that designed these and all other things used a surprisingly similar process. Principles of design. The design principles are the concepts used to organize visual information, the design elements. They are used to create balance and harmony, direct attention and control the unity and variety in a composition. Two-dimensional. The two dimensions refer to our height and width, and that means flat. As in painting, a variety of media will be used, primarily cut paper and glue. Visual arts. There are many different types of visual art. In the fine art area, they include design, drawing, painting, printmaking, and sculpture. In the applied art area, they include graphic design, lettering, illustration, computer art, and crafts, including jewelry, glass, and ceramics. Within these general headings are many specialized classes. Creativity. To create means to make something new. Creativity can be as simple as discovering something for the first time that everyone else already knows, or it can be as profound as discovering something that has never been known before. Many of us only create in the first way, but most dream of one day discovering something unique, of putting our personal mark on the universe. Composition. Composition can mean the physical image that is the result of the design, or it can refer to the arrangement of visual elements in the image. They are as varied as the objects we see around us. The main thing in these would be the alignment of all the elements in a proper way over the space provided. The space given has to be properly occupied. In animation, composition plays a crucial role, as the layouts will be designed according to the characters' positions that mean. Layouts are nothing but the surroundings where the characters sing, act, perform, and live. A perfect layout should carry out all the script's demands. What is the meaning of composition? Like characters, backgrounds also play a very important role and demands very special skills like layouts and paintings. Different scenarios like landscape, seascape, and cityscapes would have similarities between them, which are the stylized pattern among all the elements. For example, the clouds when drawn would be made out of straight or curved lines, with a shadow over the drawings that makes them more dimensional. The design process. The same basic process is used to design everything. The three components of the design process are concept, the idea of what you want to do; form, the process and the product; content, the meaning. Concept. Everything starts as an idea, a gleam in the designer's eye. Some ideas are minor and not worth much effort to accomplish. Some ideas are so important that generations have not been able to accomplish them. The concept is the most important part of the design process. All that follows is directed by and must answer to the concept. The results are only as good as the ideas that originate them. Form. This is where you give form to your concept and the work gets done. This is the physical part of the design process. You can never tell what might happen along the way. Tenacity and flexibility are as important as artistic skills. Willingness to work until you are successful is an important attribute. The designer must work with the form until all of the problems are solved. The end result is the product. Content. Only when the form meets the expectations of the concept is the process successful. The content is checked throughout the designing. Each step of the doing or making must validate the concepts. If the process strays and the results are at odds with the concept, the form must be modified or the project may fail. If the process inspires the designer to a new or better idea, the concept can be modified. Design elements. The design elements are visual tools available to the designer. These are the building blocks used to make two-dimensional images. The design elements are value, color, shape, line, space, and textures. Animation. Animation is the process of creating motion and shape change illusion by means of the rapid display of a sequence of static images that minimally differ from each other. The illusion, as in motion pictures in general, is thought to rely on the phi phenomenon. Animators are artists who specialize in the creation of animation. Animations can be recorded on either analog media such as flipbook, motion picture film, videotape, or on digital media, including formats such as animated GIF, flash animation, or digital video. To display animation, digital camera, computer, or projector are used along with new technologies that are produced. Animation creation methods include the traditional animation creation method, and those involving stop motion animation of 2 and 3-dimensional objects, such as paper cutouts, puppets, and clay figures. Images are displayed in a rapid succession, usually 24, 25, 30, or 60 frames per second. Why do we see these images as moving? The reason our eyes are tricked into seeing movement can be explained by the persistence of vision theory. The persistence of vision theory. Our brain holds on to an image for a fraction of a second after the image has passed. If the eye sees a series of still images very quickly, one picture after another, then the images will appear to move because our eyes cannot cope with fast moving images. Our eyes have been tricked into thinking that they have seen movements. The moving hand theory. You can do this by waving your hand in front of your eyes very fast. You will seem to see several hands at once. Try doing this in front of a television screen when it is switched on. You will see even more images of your hand because the television is actually flickering. By waving your hand in front of you, make your eyes very confused about what they are actually seeing. Basic techniques used in animation. Drawn animation, cutout animation, model animation, computer animation, others. Drawn animation. This covers any form where another replaces one drawing in a sequence. Each drawing is slightly different from the one before. It works the way a flip book does. These animated films are made up of thousands of drawings which are shown on screen very quickly one after the other. Cutout animation. This covers any form of animation where cutout shapes are moved around or replaced by other cutouts. Flat objects like buttons, matchsticks, and string can also be used in this form of animation. Cutouts can also be laid on top of drawings. Model animation. This involves the filming of puppets or any form of 3-dimensional models. The materials used could include plasticize, clay, or wire. In fact, anything that can be bent or formed into another shape. The puppets are positioned and filmed before being moved ever so slightly and filmed again. These shots are put together as a piece of film and will give the impression of the models moving. Computer animation. Introduction to computer animation. Animation has historically been produced in two ways. The first way is by artists creating a succession of cartoon frames which are then combined into a film. A second method is by using physical models, example King Kong, which are positioned. The image recorded, then the model is moved. The next image is recorded and this process is continued. Uses of computer animation. Animation is often thought of as pure entertainment, but it is used in many other ways. Computer games, CD-ROMs, creating characters, backgrounds, and sound effects. Internet. Sound and pictures have to be treated as a form of animation in order to send them through telephone lines. Advertising. Animation offers a way of capturing people's attention as it can create fantasy situations. Science. Many scientific ideas are not possible to film. These concepts are shown through computer-generated animation and allow scientists to visualize what cannot be seen. Military simulation. The effects of testing weapons or military maneuvers are achieved by simulating the effects on a computer. This is cheaper, safer, and faster than doing it for real. Transport. Traffic controllers, who look after the traffic light systems for air and road, use animated diagrams to show traffic flow and predict traffic problems. Doctors use computer-generated images. Traditional animation. Traditional animation, also called cell animation or hand-drawn animation, was the process used for most animated films of the 20th century. The individual frames of a traditionally animated film are photographs of drawings, first drawn on paper. To create the illusion of movement, each drawing differs slightly from the one before it. Full animation. Full animation refers to the process of producing high-quality traditionally animated films that regularly use detailed drawings and plausible movements. having a smooth animation. Fully animated films can be made in a variety of styles, from more realistically animated work such as those produced by the Walt Disney Studio, Beauty and Beast, Aladdin, Lion King, to the more cartoon styles of the Warner Brothers Animation Studio. Many of the Disney animated features are examples of full animation, as are non-Disney works such as The Secret of NIMH. Limited animation. Limited animation involves the use of less detailed or more stylized drawings and methods of movements, usually a choppy or skippy movement animation. Pioneered by the artist at the American studio United Productions of America, limited animation can be used as a method of stylized artistic expression, as in Gerald McBoing, Boeing US 1951, Yellow Submarine UK 1968, and much of the anime produced in Japan. Its primary use, however, has been in producing cost-effective animated content for media such as television. The work of Hanna-Barbera, Filmation, and other TV animation studios, and later the Internet, web cartoons. Facial animation. Facial animation is the most important part of character animation, and realistic and natural expression of emotions is one of the most important parts of animating a believable character. This, however, is also one of the most challenging aspects of animating a character. The human face is one of the most interesting and intricate parts of the human body. We can detect even the subtlest change of expression within the face, and its familiarity allows us to recognize one face out of a sea of hundreds that we come into contact with every day. In order to successfully animate facial expressions and emotion, a thorough understanding of the human facial muscular structure and how expressions are formed is necessary. Pose-to-pose animation. Some animations for television were made on pose-to-pose basis because of budget constraints. In pose-to-pose animation, purpose of creating and animating is served, but does not enhance it. However, animations for features demand more appeal, whose pose-to-pose animation does not serve any purpose of producing the feature. Pose-to-pose animation is widely used for stylized animation productions. Character animation. A pose or action should clearly communicate to the audience the attitude, mood, reaction, or idea of the character as it relates to the story. It also helps in the continuity of the storyline. The effective use of long, medium, or close-up shots as well as camera angles also helps in telling the story. Character animation. There is a limited amount of time in a film, so each sequence, scene, and frame of film must relate to the overall story. Do not confuse the audience with too many actions at once. Use one action clearly stated to get the idea across. Unless you are animating a scene that is to depict clutter and confusion. Staging directs the audience attention to the story or idea being told. Care must be taken in background design, so it isn't obscuring the animation or competing with it due to excess detail behind the animation. Background and animation should work together as a pictorial unit in a scene. Basic principles of animation. Of course, they weren't old men at the time, but young men who were at the forefront of exciting discoveries that were contributing to the development of a new art form. These principles came as a result of reflection about their practice, and through Disney's desire to devise a way of animating that seemed more real in terms of how things moved, and how that movement might be used to express character and personality. The 12 Basic Principles of Animation. In 1891, two of the greatest Disney animators, Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnson, wrote the book called The Illusion of Life. In it, the audience was introduced to the 12 basic concepts of animation that were used by the studio since 1930 in an effort to produce more realistic animations. The basic concepts are squash and stretch, anticipation, staging, straight ahead action and pose to pose, follow through and overlapping action, slow in and slow out, arcs, secondary action, timing, exaggeration, solid drawing, appeal. Squash and stretch. This is a major, if not the main technique that should be taken into account when trying to draw dynamism and movement into our characters. The concept boils down to the stretch and squash scale of a character or object as it moves. By using this technique, we are adding weight and flexibility to movement. Take the example applied to an object. Anticipation. Anticipation is a technique used to prepare the viewer for an action that is about to occur. It can be used to anticipate a move or the appearance of an object or character, creating an expectation and preceding a climax. Theoretically, the anticipation consists of a timely movement in any direction which is reinforced with a movement in the opposite direction. In cartoons, most of the time it means an anticipation before the act itself and then a recovery process to complete the sequence. Anticipation is a technique used often in cartooning to create expectation and impact in a science, whether animated or static. Staging. Staging is used to direct the attention of your audience toward what is more important in a scene that may involve several scenarios or objects. Basically, it is used to keep the focus on what is important and avoid unnecessary information. This concept is also strongly applied in comics. Colors, lights, and camera angles can be applied to reinforce the focus on the most important details. Straight ahead action and pose to pose. Straight ahead action means drawing an animated scene frame by frame from the beginning to end. Pose to pose refers only to the design of keyframes which will be filled with the remaining intervals later. Interestingly, the first technique is used only in 2D animations, but the technique of pose to pose is still used in storyboards for film and 3D animation. Follow through and overlapping action. Follow through refers to the persistent reaction in other parts of a character's body due to any movement. For example, some body parts continue to move when the character stops abruptly. Overlapping action is a technique in which some parts of the body move at different rates, such as when the torso, limbs, or hair moving at different time interval to the head. The combination of these two techniques provides greater realism to animations. Slow in and slow out. Naturally, when we prepare for a sudden movement or perform any action that requires effort, our body needs a small fraction of time to concentrate the energy required to perform this motion. The result is a sudden acceleration or constant depending on the movement, which will then reduce until it returns to its normal state. This is one reason why a character's animation becomes believable when the number of intervals or frames varies with frequency. It is an exaggerated translation of what happens in real life. In cartoons, when we place more frames at the beginning and end of an action, emphasizing a specific movement, and include few frames among them, we create the so-called slow in and slow outs. This principle is also widely used in animation when we want to move characters between extreme poses, like jumping off the ground. Arcs. The motion carried by a character or object that follows a path in a given stream is called an arc. Imagine the repetitive movements of a conductor in an orchestra, the subtle movements of an ice skater, or the trajectory of an Olympic athlete in a jump. All of them must follow an arc of fluid movements that put them in their specific categories. Bringing an object or character off its natural arc in the moment of action for no apparent reason will make your art or animation look odd and irregular. Secondary action. This is the technique of adding secondary action to the main action of the scene in order to emphasize the message that you want to send. Imagine a character walking down the street without paying attention, and cars passing by him to emphasize the danger, or create in your mind the facial expression that oscillates as a character tries to balance on a tightrope. These examples of secondary actions that reinforce the main idea of the scene and work only as a complement. Timing. The timing means the quantity of drawings that make up a particular action. For example, an object or character that moves slowly or with difficulty is usually a heavy character. So, it reflects in the amount of frames you need to draw to portray the scene realistically. The same works in reverse with a lighter object. Timing is an extremely important concept in animation and is widely used to help compose the character and its actions. Exaggeration. Not much to say here, since this is a self-explanatory principle. Exaggerating bodily expressions to add greater drama and impact to the drawings is a mandatory rule in cartooning. Picture what happens when we are startled or frightened. An unexpected reaction occurs in our body. The same should occur in cartoon drawing, but with a much more intense result. According to Disney's rule, the technique should be faithful to life, but must be presented in a more extreme form. The exaggeration involves changes to the physical characteristics of a character or to an element of the scene it is in. Remember, however, that it is important to maintain a good sense of the action you are trying to illustrate when using this technique in order to not to confuse the viewer. Solid drawing. The solid drawing refers to the accuracy of your drawings on a sheet of paper. They need to have volume and weight to be properly understood and appreciated. Notice, however, that this doesn't refer to the amount of realistic detail in your art, but just to the way you represent to the public your theoretical knowledge of drawing things. The artist who has mastered the fundamentals of design can create three-dimensional illusion in his art, even when drawing on a 2D layer. This is the real illusion of life. Some styles of cartooning require extremely faithful representation of objects, clothing, and artifices in order to properly translate a scene or place the viewer in a certain period of history, exposing minute details. For this reason, the theoretical and practical knowledge of the fundamentals of drawing and human anatomy are indispensable. The appeal is something that could be translated as the charisma and personality that the artist gives his or her creations. Whether they are good or bad, heroes or villains, men or women, the most important thing is that the viewer creates identification with them. The physical features also dictate the behavior and personality of the character. Therefore, any action or attitude that the character takes, we should consider their physical, social, and cultural features in order to replicate the appropriate appeal for the same. Animation production process. The animation production process, as with any other project, is divided into three parts, namely the pre-production, production, and post-production process. Pre-production process. Under the pre-production process for animation are the script, storyboarding, dialogue recording, animatic, character designing, prop and location design, color styling and color model sheet, track recording, character animation, background layout, and key animation works are done. Production process. The production process consists the background layout and posting, key animation, line test, digital background, cleanup in between, scanning, ink and paint, compositing, and export rendering. Post-production process. The post-production process consists of the digital department, ink and paint, compositing, after effects, additional sound effects, final editing, final output export work will done. 2D animation filmmaking, layout. The layout and posing process links the storyboard artist and the animator. The layout artist uses the storyboard and prepares an organized folder for an animator. This folder contains a field guide that shows the proper camera movement and right size of the scene. It also includes the character's main poses from the storyboard. Background painting. Once the background layouts are completed, they are ready to be painted. The background painter will take the final layout. He paints them using the palettes created by the color stylists. Once the backgrounds are painted, they will be sent to the scene setup team or the compositing team. The line art done by the layout artist was subpar. The background artist had to try to enhance them. Exposure sheets, also referred to as camera instruction sheet, dope sheet or X sheet, is a traditional animation tool. It allows an animator to organize his thinking. It gives instructions to the cameraman on how the animation is to be shot. It consists of 5 sections and is a bit longer and narrower than A4 size paper. Every 8th line down is marked thicker than the rest and shows half of a foot of film. The timing director will be the main director, takes the animatic and he analyzes exactly what poses, drawings and lip movements will be needed on what frames. An exposure sheet is created. This is a printed table that breaks down the action, dialogue and sound frame by frame as a guide for animators. Animation. Once we have the model pack, storyboard, layout and backgrounds approved, we can now proceed to animation. The animators create scenes by acting out the situations that the character in the scene requires. They based their timing and noted it down using the exposure sheets. Cleanup and in between. Once the key animation is approved, the lead animator forwards the scene on to the cleanup department. The cleanup animators takes the lead and assistant animators' drawings, trace them onto a new sheet of paper, taking care of all the details present on the original model sheets. The in-betweeners will draw. This procedure is called tweening. Cleanup and in-betweening is the entry level for all artists. Most of the artists at top peg are these kinds of artists. This is the most tedious process of the production part because this will have the most workload. The animations and cleanup are numbered to see how many in-betweens are needed. There is also timing grid on the animators' drawings as guide for the in-betweeners. After this is done, it will be given to the scanners. Pencil test. After all the drawings are cleaned up, they are then photographed on an animation camera, usually on black and white film stock. Nowadays, pencil tests can be made using a video camera and computer software. The exposure sheets were written based on the sound cut and the dialogue is also written here. After this, the director will draw sketches for timing on where the actions will occur. This will be the guide for the animators to follow. The pencil tests were done by using a webcam and connecting it to a computer. We tried different types of software to achieve this. To save time for the animators, the director himself even animated most of the difficult scenes in the series. The animator makes more poses to complete the action. He also charts them to the exposure sheet. He will provide instructions for the cleanup and the number of in-betweens needed. Scanning. After completion of drawings, now scanned into the computer. In large studios, they use a large scanner with an auto feeder. The large scanner with an auto feeder is too expensive for small studio. We just used a small home scanner and placed a peg bar, so all the paper would be centered. The problem was the small scanners were much slower than the large scanners. There is a much more efficient way of production by digital animation. This is combining the traditional method of animation with digital technology. Instead of animating on paper, the animator draws directly to the computer by digitizing tablets. The regular Wacom tablets, bamboo pen, cost about £6,000. But there are less expensive brands, but those are not durable. The digital way is more cost efficient in production. The digital way may have expensive equipment and software, but compare the cost of 20 bamboo pen will cost plus the software will only be expensive at the start of the production. In the long run, corrections will be cheaper compared to the traditional way. The next projects can be continued with the same equipment. Ink and paint. When the color models are ready, the drawings are scanned and properly exposed. The colorist can start cleaning the artwork. They start applying colors using a digital paint software. When the drawings are cleaned, inked and painted, they are ready for compositing. Since the ink and paint process and software was simple. Compositing. The compositor imports the colored background, the animatic reference and the sound as required. The compositor assembles all of these elements and create the camera moves and other necessary motions. Finally, the compositor adds any digital effects required by the scene. These can include tones, highlights, and shadows. When the compositing is finished, the final step is rendering. Compositing looks easy because all you have to do is put everything together. To lower the cost, use digital effects instead of drawing for the effects and tested it to get the results. For the best results, you need better computers for the special effects. Compositors need an eye for screenplay. Export. The final step is to render the scene as a movie or an image sequence. Generally, the compositor will be the same person to do the rendering. Even with two powerful computers, rendering is time consuming. It would take about 15 hours to render one episode in standard definition. Editing. Footage, sound effects, and sound recordings in the post-production process will be in the final output. After rendering an episode into an image sequence in compositing, edit it with the sound and music. So, it will render much faster to the chosen media. In editing, to make it short, cutting and speeding up some scenes, also adding cuts for commercial breaks will be done. Problems during compositing and editing. New compositors and editors. The new compositors and editors who are newbies due to their lack of knowledge prone to do mistakes in their job. So the director may have to redo those scenes with special effects. Special effects missing or does not match with earlier finished episodes. If the latter episodes are employed with better special effects of the newer software and technology, then the earlier episodes should be fixed with the special effects to match new episodes. Color grading. Color applied to all episodes must be same. The color correction adds the needed atmosphere for the scene. It must have a very nice stylized look. Wrong or mismatched colors from digital ink and paint. Mistakes may occur in digital paint due to changes with the production staff, such as wrong color used or color bleeding into where it shouldn't be. The directors can correct this kind of mistakes with the help of compositing software. They can go back into the digital paint software and can edit it. Wrong registration of body parts. In animations, parts that are moving are separated to lessen the work for the assistant animators. The problem comes from scanning. When the paper holes on the animation paper gets torn a bit, it sometimes gets misaligned when scanning. The artist in the digital ink and paint usually corrects this, but some artists may forget to do this because they are focused more on the special effects and staging of the scene. Missing backgrounds. Some artists may even submit incomplete set of backgrounds. The director would have instructed the compositors to use backgrounds from different episodes, and the compositors can make the mistake of choosing the wrong background. The director can always correct these mistakes in editing. Low resolution from digital ink and paint. Sometimes the process of converting the standard definition to high definition takes up the most time in compositing adjustments in sizing, mirroring, lighting, etc. Missing 3D animation and effects. Old 3D models of set properties may be used instead of new 3D models due to miscommunication and non-communication between the director and the compositors. Corrupted files. 3D files may get corrupted when copying files from one computer to another. High definition conversion needs better computers or hardware malfunction. One needs computers with high configuration to apply better effects and high definition. Computers with standard configuration may take more time even to open the scenes with special effects and may slow the process of compositing. Does not sync with animation. In sound editing, when placing the sound dialogue with the composited scenes, there may be animation parts that may not sync with the voice. Usually the problem comes from the X sheet. The mouths may not be rendered with the animation. The director has to go back and re-render these animations and replace them back in compositing. Lack of sound effects. Adding subtle sound effects is one of the most difficult tasks in editing our projects. They usually have the major sound and music effects, but lack some of the small detail effects such as a phone ring, steps, and punching sounds. These subtle sounds can be collected from different sources such as internet and can be added at the time of editing. Final output. This will be the final format of the video. We may have to prepare the file and render it according to the needs of the distributor. For viewing purposes, we should render it in standard definition. The animatic. Generally, an external software is used to do the storyboard editing to create the animatic. The animatic, also known as the Leica reel, comes directly from the storyboard. The animatic is the first movie of a project and is used to help the animators and compositors. The storyboard is scanned and mounted with sounds and dialogue. Many budding directors may not be aware of the purpose of animatics. Instead of an animatic, they may place the audio in its proper place and timing based on the storyboard. Editing an animatic. An animatic is the first stage of the edit in an animation. It is the combination of the storyboards, audio, possibly with temporary voice acting and timing. It is used as the base for the animation. Animators will take the shot angle, durations, certain actions and timings as a starting point for their work on each shot. The main difference between editing animation and editing drama is that in animation, most of the edit occurs before the visuals are complete. In drama, we will take the best performances as a base for the decisions on which shots to be used and where. In animation, the physical character hasn't yet been animated, so it's much more telling the story from the best possible angles for what is actually happening. Example for editing. An example animatic. The audio is from a single source, the music track, and it is a fair representation of what an animatic based on storyboards will typically look like. Selecting input sound source. Open the Windows Audio Recording Settings window. You can open the Windows audio settings in several ways. Double-click the audio tray icon represented by the speaker. Ensure that the mute options are not selected. In the volume control menu, click Options or Properties. Choose the Recording option by clicking in the empty bullet next to Recording. Put a check mark beside Microphone if there isn't one already. Click OK. Record voice with Mac GarageBand. Record your voice or acoustic instrument to a real instrument track. Click the track header of the real instrument track you want to record. Click the record button, the round one with a red circle. Your song will play and anything you play or sing will be recorded. Notice that a new region appears as you play. When you are finished with the part you want to record, click the play button to stop recording. Sound programs. Audacity Sound Editor. Audacity is free, open source software for recording and editing sounds. It is available for Mac OS X, Microsoft Windows, GNU, Linux, and other operating systems. Acid Express 5.0. It is easy to create original music even if you are new to loop-based music software. Download and install Acid Express. Then get loops from our Loops and Samples collection or from acidplanet.com to create your own music. Crystal Audio Engine. Crystal Audio Engine is a powerful multi-track recorder, audio sequencer and mixer, ideal for anyone wanting to get started with recording, mixing and mastering digital audio. It is designed as a modular system. The main application provides a mixing console, while the audio sequencer, live audio input and so on are loaded as separate plugins. CDEX. CDEX is a tool to do all sorts of things audio related, mainly focused on ripping and converting things like turning your home compact disc collection into an MP3 collection on your hard drive become extremely easy. With built-in support for many encoders, You will not find any shortage of options for your PDF files. Sound. Sound is traditionally divided into three elements: dialogue, music, and effects. Any auditory information that is in speech or music. Although much of the dialogue can be recorded during principal photography, it needs fine-tuning later. Sound editing. Theoretically, the first stage of sound editing is spotting, where the editors and possibly the director go through each second of the film with the supervising sound editor in order to generate a list of every sound that needs to be added, augmented, or replaced. This practice has fallen prey to demands for early previews, which have wreaked havoc on post-production schedules. Dialogue. Dialogue editing is mostly a matter of cleaning up production sound. The work can be as detailed as reusing a final consonant, one word, to complete another where it had been obscured, or removing an actor's denture clicks. ADR. Dialogue that cannot be salvaged from production tracks must be re-recorded in a process called looping or ADR, which is variously said to stand for automated or automatic dialogue replacements. ADR is usually considered as a necessary evil, but Bocher has found there are moments when looping can be used not just for technical reasons but to add new character or interpretation to a shot. Just by altering a few keywords or phrases, an actor can change the emotional bent on a scene. Sound effects. Sound effects are artificially created or enhanced sounds, or sound processes used to emphasize artistic or other content of films, television shows, live performance, animation, video games, music, or other media. In motion picture and television production, a sound effect is a sound recorded and presented to make a specific storytelling or creative point without the use of dialogue or music. The term often refers to a process applied to a recording without necessarily referring to the recording itself. In professional motion picture and television production, dialogue, music, and sound effects recordings are treated as separate elements. The dialogue and music recordings are never referred to as sound effects, even though the processes applied to such as reverberation or flanking effects often are called sound effects. Sound is very subjective and dependent upon the visual context and the mood set up in the image. The soundtrack of real life is too dense for film. In the real world, our minds select certain noises and filter out others. For instance, we mentally foreground the person speaking to us even if the background is louder. On film, the sound effects editors and re-recording mixers have to focus for us. Music. Music is an art form whose medium is sound. Generally, a song is considered the smallest standalone work of music, especially when involving singing. The common elements of music are pitch, which governs melody and harmony, rhythm, and its associated concepts tempo, meter, and articulation, dynamics, and the sonic qualities of timbre and texture. The creation, performance, significance, and even the definition of music vary according to culture and social context. Music ranges from strictly organized compositions and their recreation in performance, through improvisational music to aleatoric forms. Music can be divided into genres and subgenres. Although the dividing lines and relationships between music genres are often subtle, sometimes open to personal interpretation and occasionally controversial. Within the arts, music may be classified as a performing art, a fine art, and auditory art. It may also be divided among art music and folk music. Music may be played and heard live, may be a part of dramatic work or film, or may be recorded. Re-recording, the mix. A re-recording, also known as dubbing. Post-production audio engineer who mixes recorded dialogue, sound effects, and music to create the final version of a soundtrack for a feature film. the final mix must achieve a desired sonic balance between its various elements and must match the director's original vision for the project. During production or earlier parts of post-production, the sound engineers assemble the tracks that become raw materials for the re-recording mixer to work with. Those tracks in turn originate with sounds created by professional musicians, singers, actors or Foley actors. The first part of the traditional re-recording process is called the premix. In the dialogue premix, the re-recording mixer does preliminary processing, including making initial loudness adjustments, cross-fading, and reducing environmental noise or spill that the on-set microphone picked up. In most instances, audio restoration software may be employed. During the final mix, the re-recording, guided by the director or producer, must make creative decisions from moment to moment in each scene about how loud each major sound element should be relative to each other. Animation design. The turnaround is very rapid at all stages. The options to experiment are more limited than the experience. We have taken some acting classes because of the relative length of time to do anything in animation and the positioning within production of the animatic stage. There's a lot more thinking has to go into each and every edit. Animatic creation. This part of the session focuses on the creative stages of animatic creation. Audio, the voice records, which contains the takes selected during the record by the director and producers. Sometimes more than one take will be in place if they have selected two to decide from later. All lines and reactions, example laughs, are recorded separately to each other. So, it makes sense to go through them all with the script in hand, matching to a certain emotion or because the intention of the line is lost in performance. Storyboards and sound effects. Storyboards essentially show you the staging of the scene, which characters are involved, how they move relative to each other, and the frame, which props are used and where. How, which lines of dialogue are intended to go with which image. Each shot can be made up of several images or boards, enough to adequately convey the intention of the shot. Board timings. Whilst in the previous edit pass, we've roughly overlaid the boards in the approximately right places. We now go through and lengthen or shorten the images to get them in the right lengths and in proportion to each other. Scenes and story. Sometimes scenes need to be added if there's a story element missing that will confuse an audience, or if the episode's coming up short on time. Sometimes they will be removed or shortened if they are distracting from the overall flow of the narrative, or if you are spending too much time away from the main event, which leads to risk the audience losing interest. Deciding what needs to be removed, added or moved, and to or from where in the storyboard is the skill. Feedback. Feedback comes back on the animatic from the producers and series director. It is common to end up with requests for new storyboards. Sometimes requests for alternative versions from the voice record are made. Sometimes lines or parts of scenes which have been cut are requested to be reinserted. These points are then debated, replies are made by the director, and amend the cut accordingly. Animation design. Now, we share with you the best illustration tips and processes for developing your own. We will begin by working with photo references and inspiration resources. Then, we will explore exaggerated shapes and cartoons features with S and C curves lines, keeping correct character anatomy. Make design. Create and color your own cartooned character with an exaggerated style. This project will inform your illustration process and expose you to new techniques. You will be able to properly proportion your own characters. This technique is valuable for editorial work with portrait and cartooning. These skills will help you to approach your future character design projects with a solid basic understanding. Please note that multimedia students should have access to Adobe Photoshop, which you can download free trial from adobe.com. Character design. Build your design according to the type of your character, the art style of the story, and more importantly to the target audience. Style of the project. Decide what style is more appropriate for your projects. Note that cartoon and stylist characters visually exaggerated features and exaggerated posture. Cartoon, realism, stylist, style. For example, where is your character from? This may help determine what they are wearing. Good characters have depth and meaning. What was their past like? Did they have a rough upbringing? Complete the character design sheet. This sheet will also help you to create a functional character. How much armor is the character wearing? How it will move when the character moves? Does the character have scales? Why do they have scales? Fabric. Fabric is defined by highlights and shadows. To make your fabric look like it could naturally flow, make sure the shadow varies on either side of the fold. One shadow should be larger or have a more gradual fade. Fabric folds will generally flow in straight lines. Not all folds are equal. Each should have varying sizes. Armor. Armor. Block in color. Use the burn plus dodge tools to add, join or plating details, highlight and shadow. Spectacular highlights metal armor is highly reflective. Most often it is jointed with overlapping plates. Different areas of the armor will have a different textures. Dirt, dense, reverse, tarnish, etc. One of the best things about working in Photoshop is the ability to work in layers. Technique. After rendering out the skin tone and facial details, you can paint the clothing and a new layer. A story's ability. A story's ability to attract and hold an audience is more a result of strong character development than strong plot progression. It can easily be argued that all memorable films contain memorable characters. Where would The Godfather be without Don Corleone? Or The Wizard of Oz without the Scarecrow? A memorable character is believable, relatable, and interesting. It has been said that there are only a few basic storylines. However, an infinite number of variations exist through the introduction of new characters with unique points of views into this otherwise finite group of plots and scenarios. Short films. Some short films of the fine arts are especially abstract variety, such as Hitoshi Akayamo's Garden of the Metal. It does not require any actual characters in order to provide an audience with engaging entertainment value. However, if your intention is to create an animated short film that tells a story, you will likely to need at least one living, breathing, thinking protagonist. Audiences expected to identify themselves with main characters of the films. They enjoy one or both of these character-audience connections, and it is very crucial to an engaging character-based narrative. If the viewer sees recognizable features of your main character, they can relate to his attitude and behavior. Your protagonist might look and behave in ways that are entirely misunderstood by your viewers, but he or she can be sufficiently interesting. When creating a villain, of course, you often want your audience to fear, dislike, or distrust him. Live action films. Live action films have a decided advantage over animated films when it comes to creating audience character connections. Assuming that the main characters are human, audiences will automatically identify with the cast members of a live action film because they can safely presume certain shared attributes and motivations. Creating animated film characters. When creating animated film characters, however, this connection cannot merely be assumed. It must be effectively constructed through design, behavior, and or dialogue. No matter how realistic your attempt, all animated characters stray away from absolute realism by some degree, and most, in fact, they are significantly different from their live human or non-human counterparts. You must establish a connection between the characters and your audience. To do this effectively, you must give your characters familiar qualities. For example, Buzz Lightyear is a toy, Stuart Little is a mouse, and Shrek is a monster. All of these non-human characters have familiar qualities. Buzz wants identity and respect. Stuart wants to belong to a nice family, and Shrek just wants to be left alone. Some characters, of course, are hybrid, combining elements from two or more genres. Jimmy Neutron's best friend Goddard is a robo-dog, and Stuart Little can be considered a hybrid because he looks like a mouse but walks, talks, and dresses like a human being. Character styles. The characters in your short film can be humans, animals, anthropomorphized toys, or vehicles, vegetables, minerals, spiritual entities, or aliens, or they can defy any standard classification whatsoever. You might choose to make them highly realistic, stylist, idealist, exaggerated, caricatured, abstract, or symbolic. Character interesting. Although mixing genres in a single character can be quite interesting, mixing styles rarely leads to appealing results. Introducing abstract or cartoony elements into an realistic character design generally looks more odd than creative. Video game. An exception might be when the opposing elements are particularly stylized and more realistic bodies in many Japanese anime films. Furthermore, the line that separates semi-real from abstract is sometimes a bit blurry. The original video game version of Lara Croft is certainly idealized, but should she be considered semi-real, that she should fall under the category of a cartoon? Realistic, cartoony and abstract minerals and vegetables. And a character can be a design hybrid, like a robo-alien insect, or an anomaly hybrid like Stuart Little, whose appearance is that of a mouse and whose behavior, posture, dialogue, and dress code are that of a human. Exaggeration. One of the most common techniques for emphasizing emotions is to exaggerate certain aspects of the emotional reaction. Exaggeration helps to convey to the viewer that the character is experiencing an emotion. For example, exaggerating the dropping shoulders of a character who is depressed brings added feeling to the downcast nature of the character. Often without exaggeration, the audience may miss the emotion entirely. Emotion is something that isn't often recognizable in life. In real life, people tend to hide their emotions in public to avoid embarrassment. They may also mask what they are really feeling. Stylist. Stylization and stylist have a more specific meaning, referring to visual depictions that use simplified ways of representing objects or scenes that do not attempt a full, precise, and accurate representation of their visual appearance, preferring an attractive or expressive overall depiction. More technically, it has been defined as the decorative generalization of figures and objects by means of various conventional techniques, including the simplification of line, form, and relationships of space and color, and observed that stylist art reduces visual perception to constructs of pattern in line, surface elaboration, and flattened space. Ancient, traditional, and modern art, as well as popular forms such as cartoons or animation, very often use stylist representations. So, for example, The Simpsons, where they have used highly stylized depictions, as does traditional African art.